Former Vice President and liberal icon Walter Mondale has died at the age of 93. He served as senator from Minnesota, President Jimmy Carter's vice president, and ran as the Democratic candidate for president in 1984. NBC's Kevin Tibbles has a look back at his life and legacy.
Walter Mondale changed the face of American politics, shattering the glass ceiling by picking Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate in 1984.
I picked someone who I thought would make a superb vice president, or if necessary, a president.
When Mondale, nicknamed Fritz, ran for president, he'd been in Democratic politics for nearly 3 decades, including 12 years in the Senate and 4 as Jimmy Carter's vice president. In the primaries, Mondale battled Colorado Senator Gary Hart, who ran on New Ideas. In a debate, Mondale fought back with a fast food chain's ad slogan.
When I hear your new ideas, I'm reminded of that ad. Where's the beef? Yeah.
The fall campaign against President Ronald Reagan was an uphill fight, challenging a popular incumbent at a time of peace and prosperity.
Mr. Reagan will raise taxes, and so will I. He won't tell you. I just did.
It was intended as candor, but was seen as a blunder. Mondale got a glimmer of hope when Reagan's age became an issue. In a debate, Reagan buried those doubts and Mondale's hopes.
I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Mondale lost in a historic landslide.
All of those states colored in blue are Ronald Reagan states.
He won only his home state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia. Though only in his 50s, Mondale became a party elder, serving as U.S. ambassador to Japan. But in 2002, Mondale replaced Minnesota Democratic Senator Paul Wellstone on the ballot after Wellstone was killed in a plane crash just 11 days before Election Day. He narrowly lost his last hurrah. Mondale's wife of 59 years, Joan, died in 2014. They had 2 sons and a daughter who died of brain cancer in 2011. Walter Fritz Mondale once said he loved public life and always looked for ways to serve. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News.
Let's bring in author and NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss.
Michael, thank you so much for being with us. Al Gore said of Walter Mondale, you can divide vice presidents into 2 categories throughout American history. Those who came before Walter Mondale and those who came after. He redefined and shaped the dimensions of that job.
He did it. And, you know, the way where that came from, Joe, I'm sure you know the story, is that Hubert Humphrey, his mentor in Minnesota politics, had been great liberal senator, then served for 4 years of torture under Lyndon Johnson. Johnson used to say, I want a vice president who's so loyal, I'll clean this up for our elegant audience, who's so loyal that he'll kiss my rear end in Macy's window. And he made Humphrey do that almost every hour of those 4 years. So Humphrey went to Mondale and said, you should be vice president with Carter if he asks you, but don't do what I did, you know, basically abase myself to the president. Make a deal with Carter that if you're vice president, you're going to be given serious responsibilities. You'll have an office in the West Wing. Your staff will report both to the president and the vice president. And the result was that, as Jimmy Carter will say to this day, Mondale was, he thinks, not only the best vice president in American history, but probably the most powerful. And I think that's pretty close to being true.
And that says much not only of Walter Mondale, but also Jimmy Carter. In reading through some of Dr. Brzezinski's diaries, you find just how patient a man Jimmy Carter can be with some of those who are under him. I'm sorry, Mika, it's the truth.
Okay.
But Carter was a trendsetter in allowing this to happen. He was president after all, right?
No, that's exactly right. And he made this deal with Carter, and Carter actually was impressed when Mondale came down to Plains, summer of 1976, that, Mondale, who he had thought of as this nice guy, was wondering how strong he was. Very impressed that Mondale came in and said, "This is what I want." But, he had this odd attitude toward having been vice president. I knew him over the years, Walter Mondale, and I remember early on, this must have been 10 or 15 years ago, sent him an email saying, "Dear Mr. Vice President," he wrote back, "Please call me Fritz. Nobody wants to be called vice president."
Michael, you watch these clips that we've been playing this morning of Walter Mondale and with Ronald Reagan in particular, and it's just such a snapshot of how different things were. If you watch that clip that we just showed in the Kevin Tibble's piece from the debate, where Mondale gives a genuine hearty laugh at Ronald Reagan's line about not exposing his youth and inexperience. If you look at the clip we played at the top of the show, where Mondale in 1981 is presiding over the Senate and reading through the electoral votes, announcing his own landslide loss, where they lost, he and Jimmy Carter, 44 states in 1980, and he's kind of smiling and turns to Tip O'Neill and said it was a landslide, and then gets a standing ovation in the Senate from both sides of the aisle. You contrast that to the way the Senate is today and think about January 6th, the way we went through that election. My goodness, what a different time.
It was a different time. I had lunch with Mondale 2 days after the day that Donald Trump won the election in 2016. And as you remember, Minnesota was so close, even 2 days later, they thought it might still go to Donald Trump, which it finally did not narrowly. Mondale could not believe that the state of Hubert Humphrey and himself and Gene McCarthy and Orville Freeman, that old Democratic farmer labor progressive tradition, could come to Donald Trump. It almost did that year, and it almost did, as you know, last year.
Former President Jimmy Carter released this statement, reading in part, "I mourn the passing of my dear friend Walter Mondale, who I consider the best vice president in our country's history. During our administration, Fritz used his political skill and personal integrity to transform the vice presidency into a dynamic policy, driving force that had never been seen before and still exists today." And of course, that's something I spoke with Chris Matthews last night, Michael, and Chris worked inside the Carter White House. And he said, unlike past vice presidents, he wasn't shoved off in the old executive office building. He was in the West Wing. His staff was in the West Wing. And Chris Matthews said, "I witnessed this firsthand. Mondale was the first vice president to have an office in the West Wing, the first to have a staff working on a daily basis with that of the president himself. This made the former U.S. Senator from Minnesota the first modern vice president to spend his tenure as a functioning member of the chief executive's governing and political team." And he was that guy. And of course, he brought in also his Midwest liberal values to every debate.
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing is that, Mondale is sometimes seen, we love his graciousness and humor, but he was also a tough guy, beneath all that. For instance, in 1979, Jimmy Carter gave this famous, it's referred to as the malaise speech, a word he did not use, but saying there was a crisis of confidence in the country and a doubt about leadership, including his own. He fired half the cabinet, and Mondale was so upset by this that privately he talked to aides about maybe even resigning the presidency or refusing to run with Carter the next year in 1980. And the other thing is that two things we remember him for 1984 as a presidential candidate. We're just seeing the image on the screen. He chose Geraldine Ferraro, woman candidate. He did it because he was a strong believer in trying to help women, but also the poll numbers shown him by his aides said, we think you only do what's easy and you don't take risks. He felt that this would be, as he said, an exciting choice. And the other thing, at that convention, when he said in his acceptance speech, President Reagan and I will both raise taxes, he won't tell you I just did, that was a reaction to many people in the spring, including Gary Hart, saying, Walter Mondale is just someone who's going to tell everyone what they like to hear. That was not at the center of the man.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.